Our minds are divided between an elephant and a rider. And while we often think of the rider as the one in control of the elephant, we often forget that the rider is only the guide. We usually call our rider consciousness and our elephant unconsciousness. And it's the divide between them that makes us think we are right when we are actually wrong. And guess what? It doesn't matter how smart you are or if you're liberal or conservative. You are first and foremost human. This means that you are also biased toward yourself, your beliefs, and your values. Bias is simply when we think in a way that leads us to be wrong. It's unavoidable and hard to recognize. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of bias. But one of the most familiar to us is called confirmation bias. This is when, for example, you see some politician on TV denying that the climate is changing and only legitimizes the facts that support her or his point of view. But why does this happen, and why is it in our nature to see the evidence on only our side of the table? Our brains have to understand a shitload of data, but it can't. So instead, it takes shortcuts so that we can focus on what we think are the most important bits. These shortcuts are stored deeply in our unconscious mind and is the reason we create stereotypes. For example, when we grow up, we mostly see men as leaders and women as caretakers. Think about it. Can you name one female US president? How about one actor that is typecast as a stay-at-home dad? Because of these life experiences, our brains create patterns and store them in our elephants or our unconsciousness. These patterns then turn into generalized thoughts and expectations about most things, in this case of men and women. It turns out that in many cases these generalized thoughts are wrong. Women can make pretty great leaders and men can be amazing stay-at-home dads. But even if the writer understands this, it's still hard to control what our elephant believes. This explains a lot about why our brains have these patterns and why they create stereotypes. But what about why we try to prove people wrong even when we are wrong? A theory in evolutionary psychology says we evolved our ability to reason as a way to further our social agendas, justify our actions, and defend the groups we belong to. Why? Groups that work well together often beat groups that are made up of selfish individuals. In a way, we are all self-righteous hypocrites. Our elephants want us to survive so that our group dominates. Part of this means we often find evidence that supports a belief that we already have, rather than looking for the evidence that opposes our already held belief. And everybody is prone to this kind of confirmation bias, this video included.
Why do we struggle so much to understand and admit to the limits of our knowledge? Social media often feels like it's full of people offering confident opinions on things they really know little about. But what fuels this overconfidence? And are we all susceptible to it?
The Dunning-Kruger Effect is that when you lack knowledge or expertise, you're not in a position to realize that you lack knowledge and expertise. And the reason this happens is because often the expertise you need to come to a correct decision is exactly the same expertise you need to be able to evaluate whether or not that is the right decision. Well, one thing to recognize is that the Dunning-Kruger effect sooner or later is inevitable. It'll happen to all of us. We all have pockets of incompetence. We all make errors. And those are the moments we step into the effect and don't know that we're stepping into the effect. People often assume that people deny their incompetence because they're in denial. They know it's there, but they don't want to admit it's there either to you or to themselves. Actually, what our work suggests is that our errors are simply invisible to us. Now, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a part of the ingredient in this mix, in this stew, of intellectual humility and the need for intellectual humility. So the work that I do does suggest that we should be a little bit more intellectually humble. If we truly want to know, sometimes it means recognizing when we don't know.
So how does intellectual humility connect with our intelligence? Could it be playing a part in how we acquire knowledge? Or the way in which we perceive just how smart we really are?
We conducted 5 studies together to examine how intellectual humility relates to people's intelligence towards their knowledge as well as towards their meta-knowledge, so people's perceptions or awareness of how intelligent they are or how much they know. And what we saw is that there was no relationship between people's levels of intellectual humility and their general cognitive ability or their IQ. But even though intellectual humility wasn't predicting general intelligence or cognitive ability, it was very much predictive of how people viewed their intelligence. So people who were lower in intellectual humility indicated that they were much better at problem solving than other people, and they also overestimated how well they had done on the cognitive ability assessment. People who were higher in cognitive ability were more conservative in their assessments of their problem solving ability and actually underestimated a little bit how well they had done on the cognitive assessment. And then in another study, we looked at how intellectual humility relates to people's general knowledge. What we found is that intellectual humility was predictive of people's ability to discriminate between real and fictitious items on this assessment, meaning that people who were more intellectually humble had more general knowledge. So when people were lower in intellectual humility, they were more likely to claim knowledge that they didn't have. And so even though we saw in the first study that intellectual humility wasn't related to general cognitive ability, it did seem to relate to how much knowledge people possessed.
If intellectual humility is linked to acquiring knowledge, could it be a key component to making humans smarter? Interestingly, one of the obstacles to intellectual humility can actually be the way in which we perceive and understand human intelligence.
On one end of the spectrum, people believe that intelligence is a fixed trait, that you get a certain amount of it and that's that. On the other end of the spectrum, people believe that intelligence is malleable, that you can grow and improve your intelligence through hard work and effort. If we perceive that intelligence is something that can't grow, and that we either have it or we don't, it's harder for us to have intellectual humility. Adopting a growth mindset can help us foster intellectual humility, because when we move into this idea that intelligence can be developed, that we can get smarter and learn, which is all part of the growth mindset, it opens us up to being intellectually humble, to admitting everything that we don't yet know, and to correcting ways that we might have gone wrong.
I think intellectual humility could have a huge impact on society, and what we're seeing from the research so far is that people who are more intellectually humble have more favorable views of people who disagree with them. They're more open to negotiating and compromising. They're more open to exploring information, and especially information that is in conflict with what they currently believe.
One of the things about the Dunning-Kruger effect is that it arises when people are left to their own devices, when they're the ones trying to judge their judgment. That's when they get into trouble. So the important thing, I think, is also to seek out opinions of other people. We may not like them, but they may enlighten us.
If we want to make big discoveries, it's going to require us to wade into the unknown and really come to grips with everything that we don't yet understand. Intellectual humility can help us make progress in that direction. Of course, I believe that, but I could be wrong.
And I work with, or have taught a bit with a fellow called David Dunning, who is a social psychologist whom I adore, who has come up with a theory that explains the world better than any other theory. He says he's discovered that he's been fascinated by how good people are at knowing how good they are at doing things. Self-assessment. He's discovered that in order to know how good you are at something requires almost exactly the same skills as it does to be good at it in the first place. So that if you're absolutely no good at something, you lack exactly the skills that you need to know you're no fucking... That's very good.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Tali Sherratt and I'm a neuroscientist. The optimism bias is our tendency to believe that good things are more likely to happen to us than bad things. How many of you have ever heard a fire alarm but then completely ignored it? But what will happen if you were alerted of something good, something that you really wanted to happen? We wanted to find out.
Attention, there might be some delicious donuts in the kitchen. Attention, there might be some delicious donuts in the kitchen.
So we disregard a potential fire, but we jump up for a potential snack. What you see here is part of the brain that processes positive information about the future, and it does a really good job. Now, on the other side of the brain, we have a region that processes negative information, and the neurons don't work as well. So we want to believe that our life will be full of good things. We think the bad stuff will happen to the other guy. We're gonna have to take a little break. Get a snack, get a drink. And we'll see you back here later. So now I'm going to show you an experiment that we performed recently. Very recently, as a matter of fact. Guys, we just talked about this, right? If you don't mind, just stand up if you put your money in the machine. Oh, wow. That's a danger of the optimism bias. It can make us underestimate our risks. But now, because you're aware of it, you can protect yourself.
Do we get that dollar back, though?
Are you optimistic about it?
Economics and Behavioral Science at the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago, and co-author of the new book, Nudge, with Cass Sunstein, a professor at the University of Chicago Law School. Nudge is any small feature in the environment that attracts our attention and influences the behavior that we make. The nudging is done by what we call a choice architect, which is a fancy term for anyone who influences the choices that you make. Take the example of the cafeteria downstairs. Somebody had to decide where to put the salad bar, where to put the burgers, where to put the ice cream, where to put the coffee. That person is a choice architect because the arrangement of the food influences the choices that we make. So for example, in our cafeteria, you have to go by the salad bar to get to the burgers. That increases the chance that you're going to go for the salad, which is a good thing.
So another domain in which we see nudges is in safety. There's a beautiful road here in Chicago called Lakeshore Drive, and there's a dangerous S-curve right downtown where people are constantly wiping out. So what the city's done is painted lines on the road, and as you drive up to the most dangerous part of the curve, the lines are closer together, which gives you the illusion that you're speeding up, so you tap the brake and slow down, which is exactly what you want to do. You've been nudged. Yeah, some people worry that the idea of choice architects and nudging is somehow leading to Big Brother. And that's not the way we think about it. One of the points we stress in the book is that there has to be some choice architecture. So the person who designs that cafeteria downstairs has to put the food somewhere. The salad has to be in front of the burgers or behind the burgers. Given that you have to arrange the food in some order, we argue, why not have the choice architect arrange the food in such a way that people will be happier and healthier and maybe live a little longer?
Wat mij opvalt is dat heel veel mensen in eerste instantie geneigd zijn om de lift te pakken. Het valt me zelfs op dat soms mensen vanuit de voordeur rennen als ze in de gaten hebben dat er mensen aan het instappen zijn. We zijn hier ook wel eens bezig geweest met bewegwijzering. Dus als je naar de romans wil, volg dan de blauwe lijn. Want het werkt namelijk heel erg goed voor iedereen.